Hello and welcome back to the Stronghold. I'm the Magi and welcome to Midweek Magic, where I want you to grow your collection by winning 2 free rare or better ICRs each and every week. This week's Midweek Magic takes us into the future with the brand new Alchemy release, some updates, and multiple decks for us to consider as a budget community. But before we get into all of that, this whole Midweek Magic thing has become a bit of a tradition here at the Stronghold, and it all started with our crack team of researchers discovering that we were the only YouTube channel making consistent, proactive, and timely Midweek Magic coverage. And here we are years later, and it appears that we're still the only ones out there doing it for the budget community. So be sure to subscribe to the Planeswalker Stronghold so that we can be here for you every chance we get. Now, what were we talking about? Oh yeah, right. Well, to get things started, let's talk about the Midweek Magic event. We are going to be shown a series of decks, probably 4 or 5. Sadly, Wizards of the Coast could not be bothered to preview these decks this time around. And I have to say, as a content creator, it's rather frustrating that sometimes they do and sometimes they don't, because it just throws off production. But enough about me. I will be jumping into this event basically as soon as it starts and begin that evaluation process. So be sure to look down in the comments for those initial reviews. And as always, I will be covering this event live on Twitch as well as over on Patreon. So be sure to check out those additional sources of information. Now, before we start talking about the new cards, there are a couple of rebalances here to discuss. First off, Fragmented Reality, to quote Wizards, has created an unfair early game combo with multiple leyline cards that works even when you take a mulligan to 4 or 3 cards. This has resulted in a powerful and consistent deck that is taking up too much space in Historic and Timeless. I have to say, as someone who tries to keep an eye on the various formats, this is one that folks have been complaining about for a while. So at the very least, I'm glad that the complaining will probably now shut down on that. And this multiple leyline deck is probably not viable anymore. They have changed this so that you cannot target your own enchantments. It has to be a target that your opponent controls. Next up is Geological Appraiser, and again, to quote Wizards, has proven it's a bit too aggressive for our current Alchemy and Historic formats. By slowing down this card, Discover-based decks will be better balanced across the format. They didn't really make any changes other than the casting cost. It went from 2 red and 2 to 2 red and 3. Whether this is really enough to slow down the deck or make it less consistent will remain to be seen, particularly when this got banned earlier in other formats, namely Explorer, I believe it was. This card, basically everyone got 4 free copies of this if you did the ban trick. So everyone has this. We'll see if this is enough to dissuade people from continue playing it. Now let's talk about the new set itself. So I wanted to start this conversation about the latest Alchemy expansion by talking about some factors actually from the base set, most specifically oozes. I've gotten a lot of questions about why I didn't talk about existing oozes, and the one that I get the most questions about is actually Alchemy specific. But the primary reason that I haven't talked about these in the Murders budget perspective up to this point is because these really are a nombo with Slime Against Humanity. A nombo, of course, being something that might look like a combo or a synergy, but really doesn't work the way you want it to. Slime Against Humanity, of course, is not a creature in and of itself. It's a sorcery. It does create an ooze creature token, but when that token dies, of course, it doesn't exist in the graveyard. It doesn't really exist in exile. What we're really looking at is the card itself, Slime Against Humanity. So it doesn't have as much opportunity to synergize with some of the existing slime cards, ooze cards that we might like. And I bring it up now because, as I said, I get a lot of questions about particularly Mephedros slime being an uncommon and Golgari in nature. It is, of course, an ooze. And it looks like it's going to do the things that we want it to do. It has a base 3/3 trample for 3 mana, 1 and Golgari colors. When it dies, conjure a card named Mephedros Slime into your graveyard, perpetually double the power and toughness of Mephedros Slime. So that all sounds really great and would kind of work with Slime Against Humanity, because it is putting slimes, oozes into your graveyard. However, this last couple lines of text is what really messes that up. Because after you double it, then you shuffle both of those copies, your original and the conjured copy, into your library, where it can no longer really interact with the Slime Against Humanity. They're both fine cards. They're both doing similar things of trying to flood the board with oozes, but they don't necessarily work well together. And at this point, if you have paid any attention to Standard of recent, the introduction of Insidious Roots, I think there's a lot better things you could be doing with wild cards in Golgari decks right now than trying to diversify your slime options. Now, this latest expansion also brings in a new mechanical keyword to the Alchemy Onslaught. This one, of course, being Incorporate, which functionally adds an additional cost and an additional benefit when cast to another target card in your hand. For instance, Scrutiny of the Guild Pack is a 2-mana enchantment. When it enters the battlefield, you may choose a creature card in your hand. If you do, that card perpetually incorporates 1 white mana and gains, when you cast this spell, create a 2/2 white and blue detective creature token. In addition, Scrutiny of the Guild Pack also makes your multicolored creatures get +1/+1. And I think this is kind of an interesting little concept here, particularly for this one, obviously targeted at the blue-white detectives deck, because now you can take a blue detective, make it multicolor, give yourself an additional 2/2 detective multicolor body on the board, and give both those creatures +1/+1, since they are now both multicolored. Really interesting dynamics. I'm not sure how much of this they're going to be able to use, but I think this is a great place to introduce it, in Ravnica being a set that typically cares about multicolor, honestly, more than what the Murders of Karlov Manor would typically indicate. When I first saw this, what I really was hoping to see was maybe some Incorporate cards that targeted cards in your opponent's hand, perhaps as like a penalty cost to make their creatures better, but also adding a dynamic layer of potentially making that card uncastable if it now required a mana color that their deck simply couldn't produce. We do not see any examples of that complexity within this set, but who knows, maybe that'll come around at some point in the future. The spellbook is one of those alchemy-only mechanics that I, as a budget content creator, always have an eye out for. Of course, primarily that is because sometimes the uncommons can give you access to rare and even mythic cards without violating things like artisan deck construction rules and things like that can give a real tactical advantage to us budget players. Sadly, this set once again does not introduce any of those spellbook type mechanics at uncommon and give us the leg up that I'm really looking for. However, there are 3 spellbooks in this that will allow you to functionally play cards as though they were in your collection without actually needing to. For instance, the Relics of the Rubble Belt give you access to all 10 of the signets through its spellbook component, and you don't have to own a single copy of those. In a similar context, the spellbook for Voice of the Conclave features only cards that have the Convoke mechanic, where you can tap creatures to pay part of the mana cost, and includes some really heavy hitters. Conclave Tribunal is a uncommon that I've recommended several times over the years on the channel. Of course, Venerated Loxodon is an absolute star within the Convoke mechanic. And everyone's favorite Knight Errant right now is from Standard. Knight Errant of Eos is a rare also available through the spellbook. So again, unlocking a lot of potential power with a single rare wild card spent on the Voice herself. And last up in the bookies category, we've got Tajik, Legion's Valor, which, well, kind of brings an army all on his own. Each and every turn, he is drafting a progressively larger mana value addition to your Boros Legion. And, well, it's just kind of a nice trick, starting with the 1 mana Boros Recruit and going all the way up to, I believe, Aurelia, the Law Above, is 5 mana from the current standard set. No, just for the record, this is not sponsored content, and I don't know anything about the Bookies television show. I just thought it was a cute bit to use for the backgrounds. Similar to the spellbook bookie cards, we always see a few cards that give you access through the conjure mechanic to other cards that are not only not in your deck, but don't even need to be in your collection. This set is no different. There's several examples there. But the one that I think is the most interesting is the Izzet Polarizer that gives you access to the rare Ionize 3 mana instant counterspell that also deals 2 damage to the spell's controller, or the 3 mana uncommon instant Electrolyze, which deals 2 damage divided as you choose among any number of target creatures or players, and also draws you a card. The biggest downside miss potentially that I see on this is our Vishino wizard friend has to die to do his trick, and I think this card would be so much more interesting if it did it on an ETB trigger. But, you know, perhaps that would have made it too powerful and maybe it needed to be a mythic at that point. I don't know. So I think this one's very interesting. I think it gives a lot of players potential access to cards without needing to craft those cards, and that's always good from a budget perspective. But I do still feel like this card is a little bit lacking. It'll be interesting to play, but not something I'd plan on crafting just for that attribute, unless you're just really into the Izzet decks or Wizard decks. This expansion, of course, features all the expected creature types, from humans and soldiers and rogues and things like that. All of those synergies, I think, are pretty linear and fairly obvious. And, of course, the set also has some detectives and things of that sort. Again, pretty expected and run-of-the-mill at this point for a set like Murders. However, there are 3 creatures here in particular with unique creature types that I do think are worth maybe keeping an eye on. The first is the Emporium Thopterist, a 2 mana uncommon 1/1 Valdekin Artificer. This particular Artificer cares about Thopters, as they often do, giving +2/+0 to all of your Thopters. Then at the beginning of your upkeep, you conjure a card named Ornithopter into your hand, which of course is a Thopter. It has a 0 casting cost, and it is a 0/2 creature. Thopterist here obviously makes that a 2/2 offensive threat that usually it just isn't. Cheerios decks, eggs decks, things that care about 0 casting cost, particularly artifacts, these are already a relevant deck type in Historic very often, and this card might have some legs in those Historic builds. Next up, we've got a very familiar creature type here, Snarlfang Vermin, a 1-mana 2/1 creature rat. Whenever it deals combat damage to a creature, if that creature is still on the battlefield, suspect that creature. It perpetually gains this ability. And I believe, although that's worded a little weird, I believe what it's referring to there is it perpetually gains the suspect ability. So you can't use cards to remove it. Whenever a suspected creature an opponent controls dies while Snarling Vermin is in your graveyard, that opponent loses 1 life. And I think this is a very interesting card for the rat archetype. One of the biggest drawbacks of the Rakdos rat decks that we saw from Wilds of Eldraine is that the tokens can't block. And this kind of leverages the battlefield because, of course, the Vermin probably sacrifices itself to make sure that one of their bigger blockers can no longer effectively block. And I think that gives a lot of mileage onto that. And particularly when you have multiples of the Snarlfangs out, you could sacrifice one like we just talked about, but that second one can stay on the board to trigger its second ability and make your opponents lose life as those creatures eventually die off to the inevitable onslaught of rat tokens. From a budget perspective on this card, I still think Rakdos Rats is a very likely theme, or at the very least component, of next year's starter deck for Black and Red. And I think if they choose to include Alchemy cards next year like they did this year, which they may or may not, there's no guarantee, I think this is one of those cards that you're very likely to see Alchemy representation to that deck. So I wouldn't necessarily rush right out and do this unless you're just really into rats and want to extend that deck in Alchemy a little bit. Finally, we've got Guildpact Greenwalker, which is a card that has been showing up in a lot of content and things like that because it was the signature poster child card for Incorporate. I'm more interested in the fact that it is a plant creature type, and we have seen recently with Insidious Roots that plants are kind of all the rage. So while this is a great card in its own right, it only gets better in something like an Insidious Roots deck. I wouldn't necessarily craft it with that in mind, but if you do happen to randomly get a copy of this, that is the place I would be trying to put it as a budget player. Another interesting point, we've seen a lot of spoilers, leaks, whatever you want to call it, about the upcoming Outlaws of Thunder Junction set, one of which, of course, is the Commander decks, and one of those Commander decks seems to imply that a cactus plant creature is a relevant part of that deck. Of course, there's no guarantee that the Commander themes are going to show up at all or to what degree in the typical standard set, but it is an interesting speculative point. Plants might be more and more on the rise. We'll have to wait and see how that plays out. Now, even very new players very quickly realize that red, and in particular mono red, is very often a deck archetype that tends to punch above its weight, often almost universally even being 15% of any given format. So one of the last things that I wanted to talk about card-wise in this new expansion is the red cards, particularly a couple of uncommons here that are really bringing the heat. The first up is the 1-mana sorcery speed uncommon, Shove Aside. It deals 3 damage to target creature or player. The downside, of course, being it is sorcery speed. However, if you are the second player or on the draw, i.e. not the starting player, you can cast Shove Aside as though it had flash, making it a functional copy of Lightning Bolt. This is hugely significant because, of course, Lightning Bolt is one of the best direct damage spells ever printed, if not the best. Also, Lightning Bolt is available on Arena and legal and timeless, but it, of course, is a fairly expensive rare, particularly since the card was originally printed as common. This, being an uncommon, is a nice budget alternative for those that maybe don't have Lightning Bolts or don't have them in the budget at the moment. I would not say as a budget alternative it's as good as the original because it is conditional, but since this card is going to be legal in timeless, or at least that is the expectation, it is certainly a valid budget alternative, as well as potentially Lightning Bolt 5 through 8 for your timeless direct damage spells matter style decks, and well worth keeping an eye on. The second card that I think is potentially even more interesting is the 2 mana uncommon Case of the Market Melee. When this case ETBs, it deals 1 damage to any target. Okay, not that big a deal. Damage isn't removed from creatures during the cleanup step, and of course that will affect you and your opponent symmetrically, so do keep that in mind. This case solves when 3 or more creatures are damaged. Again, it's counting both yours and your opponent's creatures. And when it is solved, whenever you attack with 1 or more creatures, this case deals that much damage divided as you choose among any number of targets. So if you have 3 creatures swing, you can deal 3 damage either to a single target or multiples, spreading it out to 1 damage to 3, etc., etc. This can go at your opponent's blocking creatures. This can also go at your opponent's dome. And wow, just a really versatile card. Probably the best version of this machine gun style card that we have seen. And it really brings us to an Alchemy specific deck that I was planning on talking about anyway, now even just that much better. That deck, of course, is a variant of the Red Rush deck, built around the uncommon Raid Bombardment, 3 mana enchantment. Whenever a creature you control with power 2 or less attacks, Raid Bombardment deals 1 damage to the player or planeswalker that creature is attacking, basically turning your creatures into a machine gun style effect that deals direct damage to your opponent. This deck really could not be simpler. It is really just built around 2 copies of this, or 3. It was recently reprinted in the Brothers of War bonus sheet. So you might have 3, maybe even 4 copies of this laying around. You definitely have 2 from your mono red starting deck. If that's all you got, adding in a copy of Burn Bright also from your mono red starter deck is a great way to kind of finish out that, 3 mana finisher. Beyond that, the deck typically just runs a bunch of 1 and 2 drop red creatures with haste. For this particular season, Ginger Brute is also a fine addition to the deck. All of these guys just get in there and deal damage. And you don't even really care if they die because they're dealing additional damage off Raid Bombardment, and hopefully you can get wide enough to deal enough damage before they kill off your blocking creatures. The brand new Frantic Scapegoat and its suspect and ability to pass that suspect onto a larger, more potential threat, also a great way of allowing your creatures to be evasive. Similarly, Phoenix Chick's evasive ability is very nice. I think everybody knows Monetary Swift Spear pumps very nicely in combat, thanks to the addition of things like Shock and Lightning Strike. You can fill 5 cards on this deck strictly out of your starter decks. Very easy. Vashino Branchwalker is maybe one of the weaker haste creatures here, but the fact that he has an onboard pump ability can sometimes allow you to throw in the additional damage that you might need. This particular version of the deck is splashing green, and I would just caution to be aware that the kicker ability on this would make the Branch Rider a base 3/3, which would nullify the Raid Bombardment effect. Of course, this was a deck I was already planning on talking about because Raid Bombardment is perpetually in everyone's collection, regardless of when they start with Arena. And every now and then, the 1 and 2 drop red hasty creatures reach that critical mass where it does become a viable deck for Alchemy. I did not expect Case of the Market Melee to be printed, but frankly, it just makes the deck that much better. And although this version that you're looking at right now does not include that, the link and deck list that I'll be providing in the finished content will include that. I just can't build the deck prior to its release. The magic that is Arena. There are a couple of rares here. Feldon, of course, gives us a form of pseudo card draw. And the main reason that I am splashing green in this is Samut. Not only is he a 3-mana 2/3 first strike vigilance haste creature, but whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, if that creature entered the battlefield this turn, draw a card. So it just really adds even more synergy and card draw to the deck. Also running Squee Dubious Monarch, because not only does he fit the Raid Bombardment, Case of the Market Melee attributes, being a smaller creature, but it will also pump out additional tokens. Those tokens, if I am understanding the timing and mechanics, will not themselves trigger Raid Bombardment because they did not actually attack. They simply enter the battlefield already attacking. So you will miss that trigger there. Don't let that catch you a damage short. But of course, on subsequent turns, when those goblin creature tokens do attack, they will trigger Raid Bombardment. Also got a couple of other Gruul cards in here. Firstborn and Ruby in here, just because they fit that low power, hasty concept. I don't think these are necessarily chase cards for this deck, but if you're looking to fill out those 1 and 2 drop hasty creatures, don't forget those are a thing. Mana, I've kept it really, really simple with mostly mountains. Single forest here for the green splash. Copperland Gorge is the rare dual land that everyone has. Thran Portal is something that I have recommended as a 1-copy craft for all of your in-rotation needs, both Alchemy and Standard. And of course, Captivating Crossroads is an Alchemy-specific rare dual land that very similarly fits into any 2-color deck and helps you fix your mana just a little bit. Of course, everyone has a copy of Samut, but if you don't feel like the green splash is working for you, this deck very classically works very nicely with just mono red. And even with that, you can probably go from 19 lands that I'm showing here and at least test 18. In some cases, you might have to go back up to 20. Sometimes the hand smoothing algorithm can be a little bit fickle. Sometimes they make adjustments that are hard to pick up on. But somewhere between 18, 20, maybe 21 lands at the top end is really where you want to be on this. And of course, it's all about those 1 and 2 drop hasty creatures here. Now, this set, like most of the recent Alchemy releases, will bring along with it an Alchemy Premier Draft environment, which is scheduled to run March 5th through the 12th. Since only 1 card in each of the draft packs is an Alchemy substitution, I don't really recommend this particular Premier Draft event as a way to efficiently add these Alchemy cards to your collection. But of course, a lot of people have found the Murder's draft environment to be a little dry and get a little bit old due to some balance issues. So I certainly couldn't blame someone for participating in this if they're looking to change up those draft options. To me, more interestingly, the March qualifier events are all Alchemy. We got the March 16th, best of 1, March 22nd, best of 3, and then March 23rd and 24th is the full-on qualifier weekend. I don't remember them doing Alchemy on this, but I'll be the first to admit that I don't pay a lot of attention to these qualifier weekends, or honestly Alchemy all that often either. So it might just be that I have overlooked this and this is a normal thing. Like I said in the beginning, I think this Murders at Karlov Manor Alchemy set is probably the best one we have seen, particularly for budget players, since the Innistrad introductory set to Alchemy more than 2 years ago. And while I might continue to be conservative with my investments in this set, I certainly could not begrudge people that wanted to be a little bit more aggressive. I said just a few minutes ago that the Premier Draft is maybe not the most efficient way to add cards to your collection. However, if you are looking to more aggressively diversify your Alchemy collection, picking up the presumed Alchemist bundle that will be offered, getting 20 packs for the cost of 15 is really a very good value here and a prime way of adding these cards to your collection. And hey, just in case you didn't catch all that, Matt would like you to know that the deck list that we discussed in this video is going to have a link down in the doobly-doo to take you over to Aetherhub, along with a link to any other alternative lists that you might wish to consider. He only asked that you give it a little thumbs up when you're over there checking out the deck list. And I plan on live playing this event on Wednesday at 11 a.m. over on my Twitch channel, so definitely stop in and check it out. Because the Stronghold is so much more than just a YouTube channel, and you can find links to all of our other social media outlets in our profile. Because at the end of the day, we're all budget players. And as a community, we're stronger together. So like, comment, subscribe, follow, do all those things to show a little love. It's appreciated more than you know.